In this video, I'm going to discuss policy diffusion with you. So policy diffusion occurs when the probability of adopting a policy in one government is influenced by a policy in another government. So the probability of adopting a policy is influenced by a policy in another government. So what does this mean? Well, uh, uh, I usually look at the state level. So this means that when Ohio adopts a policy, it possibly influences other states, maybe Michigan, or Indiana. Now, states tend to influence other states that are bordering them for a couple of reasons. Number one, because they share policy relevant characteristics. Ohio and Michigan and Indiana aren't terribly different states culturally, that is, except Ohio has a culture of winning a lot of football games while Michigan does not. But other than that, Ohio and Michigan are pretty similar. Indiana is pretty similar to Ohio and Michigan. Uh, so so it's reasonable to believe that policy decisions in Indiana might influence Ohio, and policy decisions in Michigan might influence Ohio, and policy decisions in Ohio might influence Michigan, and so on, because they're similar states, so they face similar issues. So policy diffusion being that the probability of adopting a policy in Ohio is influenced by the policies that are adopted in Michigan or Indiana or Pennsylvania, because we share similar characteristics. We have the same kind of policy issues. So that would be, it's reasonable to believe that the states that you border influence each other in a way that we wouldn't be looking to Arizona and New Mexico, because they have different populations, they have a different history, they have a different culture. They're bordering states with Mexico, so maybe they have different policy agendas, because maybe they're more focused on immigration issues. In just the same way that Georgia, where I was teaching recently, Georgia doesn't look to Ohio and Michigan for how to handle, snow removal. You don't need to do a whole lot of snow removal in the Atlanta area. So states that border each other, states that are in the same region, have similar characteristics, and so it makes sense that they would look toward each other. I want to talk a little bit about the mechanisms for policy diffusion. So policy innovation is when a state adopts a new policy. Policy diffusion is when a policy spreads from one state to the next, or one county to the next, or city, or country. It could be any level of government. And so when we talk about something diffusing, it's spreading throughout the system. Uh, there are mechanisms for how policies diffuse. So let's talk about some of those mechanisms. So there's learning. Learning. So sometimes one state uh, adopts a policy because they learn something. They've collected information about how a policy has done in another state, and they realize, wow, that's actually a really good policy. We want to do that too. We have now collected information. We've learned about the outcomes, and now we can make a good policy decision. We're uh, uh, we're going to adopt this policy because of learning. And it might spread through the system by learning. States learn from the good policy decisions and bad policy decisions of each other. Sometimes it's simply a case of imitation. So states will just imitate each other, just like I was talking about a moment ago with Ohio, Michigan, Indiana. States will imitate other states that are like them. They share similar characteristics. They have similar populations. Uh, uh, they have similar characteristics and similar things about them that would make it make sense for them to adopt policies of these other states. So they're imitating other states that are like them. This could be regional, right? So states in the South sometimes view policy issues differently than states in the North. States on the coasts certainly have different ideologies than states in other regions of the country. And sometimes they imitate each other. Then there's also competition. This is one that gets pointed to by policymakers quite a bit. Let's see if I can. I'm getting better at this pen, but not great. So that says competition. Competition. So states want to achieve some kind of competitive advantage. Think about states that adopt. Well, I'm going to get to examples in a little bit here. Actually, states will adopt different policies for competitive purposes. They want some kind of advantage over another state, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then finally, there's one we'll talk a little less about is coercion. Coercion is, in the state level example, this would be the federal government mandates states do something. Now they've been coerced. You don't. You're in a state possibly that doesn't want to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples, but the Supreme Court rules that that's unconstitutional. So now all states have to recognize same-sex marriage. All states have now been coerced into getting rid of their same-sex marriage bans. So that's something that comes from the top. We'll talk about that a little bit less in the next list of examples. So I have a few examples that I would like to discuss. So some examples. Let's start with gambling. Casino gambling. Casino gambling is an example of how policies diffuse. Through what mechanism? Well, let's say, if you remember, though you may not, Ohio did not always have legalized gambling and have casinos. Prior to that, people would go to Michigan or West Virginia and gamble. So busloads of people would take weekend trips to casinos in Michigan, or casinos in West Virginia, or even bus trips up to Canada, uh, up to Windsor, to gamble. And finally somebody said, well, and there were several ballot initiatives that got struck down before Ohio finally legalized gambling, but you would say this is probably a competition. So Ohio adopts legal casino gambling because our policymakers see, well, look, if we legalize casinos, at least in the major cities, and we allow for casinos to be here, we can keep tax revenue. We can keep tax revenue in the cities. We can keep people gambling in the cities, and then they'll go out to restaurants in the cities, and they'll stay in hotels in the cities. Why are we watching our population go gamble in other states, and they're just taking their tax revenue elsewhere? We want some of that tax revenue. We're going to compete for that tax revenue, and so we want to make sure that uh, we compete when it comes to gambling. Let's see. No state income tax is another good example. So states will often have no state, well, not often, but a number of states have no state income tax. The the uh, uh, the result of this is a lot of times um, other mechanisms for collecting tax revenue that might be higher than their competitors. So in some ways it might be a wash, but at least uh, these states with no state income tax can try to bring in talent. They can get people who want to move there and work there because they have a lower tax burden and the cost of living is then lower. So that would also be competition. And then I already did the same-sex marriage example for coercion, but then there's things like there's labor policies like right to work, and states will pass right to work to create a business-friendly environment that will bring um, new jobs. The auto industry was once very strong in the Midwest, and a lot of auto manufacturers have gone down south for various reasons. But one of them may be you don't have to deal with higher wages and labor unions that come with non-right to work states. So right to work creates a competitive advantage. Come uh, bring your manufacturing facilities to our state because we have a low tax burden and we have this business friendly policy that will make it so that you can bring jobs to our state, uh, uh, but you won't have to pay as much on your end for those jobs. Uh, so come to our state. Uh, and that's competition, but it's also, I wanted to mention this one because it's also imitation. Because some of these policy areas, are very regional. And so about half the United States is right to work now, a little over half. But this is a policy that started very much so in the South. Uh, More dominant in the South early on. Now it's spread throughout. It's spread throughout the country and even into historically pro-union areas. But a lot of states in the South adopted right to work, and some of that might have been competition with the North in trying to attract jobs and manufacturing and different businesses to come to the state. But a lot of that also might have to do with cultural characteristics that states in the South share, which is generally an anti-labor union perspective. Though I will say, as somebody who came from the Atlanta area recently, um, and lived in the Atlanta area for a while, there is actually more of a labor movement in the South than many people think. But nonetheless, so this might be because of competition and imitation. Uh, you can you can make an argument for a lot of these different mechanisms, but and they're kind of hard to measure, but they're kind of theoretical mechanisms. You often hear the competition argument when it comes to state policy, especially. Um, all right, so just to recap real quick, policy diffusion occurs when the probability of a government adopting a policy is influenced by a policy that's been adopted by another government. These mechanisms include for policy diffusion when these policies spread throughout the states in our examples here. They happen through learning or imitation or competition or coercion. And some of these examples include recent gambling laws passed in states where states are competing with each other, adopting a no state income tax policy, so there's no state level income tax in certain states. That might be done out of competition. Right to work could be done out of competition or imitation. Same sex marriage could be coercion. You could also argue that any of these are learning. You see gambling working in one state, and you've learned that it's working, and you want to take it to your state because it's a good policy. Or same thing with income tax or right to work or anti-smoking policies or certain education policies. You name it. You could consider that learning too if you're watching what other states are doing and you're adopting those policies. So that's policy diffusion in a nutshell. Thank you.